Live from London, it's City News International.
City Weltnachrichten.
City Noticias Internacionales.
This is City News International.
Good afternoon and welcome to City News live from Northampton Square. My name is Akila Quigno.
And I'm Olivia Briand. Our main headlines today. US President Joe Biden is calling on legislators to tighten up gun control following a mass shooting in Colorado.
The European Union says it will retaliate against China in a diplomatic row that has seen Beijing issue sanctions against a number of EU representatives.
The European Commission has proposed new rules that would let the EU restrict vaccine export for up to 6 weeks.
US President Joe Biden is calling on Congress to pass gun control regulations, including a ban on assault weapons. Democrats have already passed 2 bills in the House this month that will strengthen background checks required to purchase a gun. They could face resistance from Republicans in the Senate.
I don't need to wait another minute, let alone an hour, to take common sense steps. We can ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in this country once again. I got that done when I was a senator. It passed. It was law for the longest time, and it brought down these mass killings. We should do it again.
This comes in the wake of a mass shooting in Boulder, Colorado, where 10 people were killed on Monday. A 21-year-old man arrested at the scene of the shooting has been charged on suspicion of murder. This was the second mass shooting to happen within 1 week in the US.
The European Union has threatened to retaliate against China a day after Beijing blacklisted a number of EU leaders. European Parliament President David Sassoli says Beijing's counter-sanctions were unacceptable and would be met with consequences. The EU-China diplomatic row began on Monday when Brussels joined a number of Western countries in imposing sanctions on several Chinese officials for human rights violations against the Uyghur minority.
The European Commission has proposed controversial measures which would let EU leaders temporarily stop vaccine exports. The rules would allow the bloc to reduce vaccine exports to countries where vaccination rates are higher than in Europe. It could also apply to countries receiving more EU-made vaccines than they are sending back. The bloc has been criticized for their slow vaccine rollout, and tensions over vaccines have been mounting between London and Brussels. The European Commission has stated the measures do not aim to single out any one country. EU heads of government will discuss the proposal tomorrow. At the moment, the UK is not on the list of countries where a ban could be imposed, but it could be added later. EU leaders will make a final decision on this tomorrow. Our health correspondent Charles Kershaw has more on the evolution of COVID-19.
City News International with your weekly coronavirus update
in London and across the world.
With COVID-19 case rates going up rapidly, more and tougher restrictions are expected in many European countries for the Easter holidays. Spain has declared a nationwide curfew until early May 2021. People are only allowed to go out for work, for education, to buy medicine or care for elderly people or children. The country's regions are limiting mobility during the upcoming holidays in order to curb the spread of the virus. Chancellor Angela Merkel said Germany is now in a very serious situation and agreed to meet with state leaders on the 12th of April to discuss the next steps. However, the country has cancelled plans for a hard lockdown over the Easter period, with the Chancellor describing the plans as her mistake. Nonetheless, other restrictions remain in effect until 18th of April due to increasing infection rates. Meanwhile, 16 areas of France are entering a new month-long lockdown, including the Paris area. A total of around 21 million people will be affected. Non-essential businesses will have to close, but schools and hairdressers will remain open, with a nationwide curfew in place between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. This new lockdown comes as the country tries to enact new economic measures.
The French Finance Ministry is to propose the path out of its mounting debt crisis tomorrow. But despite many innovative proposals being put forward, the government now looks likely to return to austerity to try to balance the books. Critics say the less well-off will shoulder much of the burden. Tommy O'Callaghan reports.
For almost a decade now, France is owed more in debt than all but 3 countries in the world. Like most European leaders, President Macron broke with austerity to offer generous supports during the coronavirus pandemic. But as a result, France's debt shot up €300 million. Its debt is now a fifth greater than the size of its entire economy. Macron's government has long pushed for reforms as a means of balancing its books, such as limiting access to benefits and increasing the retirement age. Those proposed reforms were met with mass strikes. but the government believes they will be even more necessary after the pandemic. Emmanuel Jesua, an economist at Rexicode Economic Research Centre, agrees with the proposals.
It was important to reform the French rules towards the European average practices. The French rules were quite light, and also the replacement rate was quite high by comparison to other European countries.
But the reforms, which critics say would hit the poorest hardest, are opposed by 2/3 of French people. Economists debated other radical means of dealing with the COVID debt, namely a large-scale debt cancellation. But Christine Lagarde, head of the European Central Bank, was quick to throw cold water on the idea. And when Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire proposed tax increases on Monday, Macron's office shut him down, saying they prefer to cut spending due to France's already high levels of personal taxation. Arthur Jattot, member of the Appalled Economists Research Group, believes the commitment to the reforms exposes the government's true loyalties.
The interest rates at which the French state borrows are lower today than they were 10 years ago. I say that to lead into my argument that there is no urgency regarding the public debt in France. So when Bruno Le Maire says we must completely repay the COVID debt and for that we must reduce public spending, that's done to correspond to his political agenda.
Correspondre à son agenda politique.
Decisions regarding who should pick up the COVID bill are not easy anywhere, but a looming French election may be forcing Macron to pick his loyalties perhaps sooner than he'd like. For now, it looks like big business may win out. Tommy O'Callaghan, City News, London.
Last Saturday's protest against lockdown regulations, vaccines and mask wearing has brought to light the substantial amount of misinformation around COVID-19. Hundreds of anti-vaccine protesters turned up and more than 30 people were arrested in the aftermath. But despite this new dangerous movement, trust in the vaccine remains high. Sanya Skov has more on the story.
The streets of London were concealed by these chants this past weekend. Hundreds of people showed up to the protests, including elderly and younger citizens. Steve Steglow, an investigative reporter for Reuters Institute of Journalism, has worked on many articles concerning the pandemic, and while he doesn't share the protesters' opinion, he understands their motive.
Well, I would assume after a year, and I think the first anniversary is this week in the UK of lockdown, people are exhausted of it. So it's not that surprising. I mean, it's very frustrating. So I think they're just weary of it.
Through his research, he has noticed that the spread of misinformation on social media is one of the reasons for people protesting the lockdown measures.
I don't think you see a lot of misinformation in, say, the mainstream media. So most of what I saw in researching, the vast majority is spreads on social media. Had just one individual who's engaging with people on Twitter suddenly becomes this sort of key figure in the spread of anti-COVID-19 vaccine, I would say, myths.
Research from Reuters Institute has shown that despite the protest and sharing of misinformation, most people will still take the vaccine. Richard Stott, a British artist, had his first dose of the vaccine last week.
I've always been confident in getting the COVID vaccine. I wanted to get it as soon as it was offered to me. It's the passport to freedom, really. And I trust the scientists, I trust all the research that's gone into it. So I was never hesitant. As soon as it was going to be offered to me, I wanted to take it. And also it's our responsibility to each other as well to protect not only ourselves but the people around us by getting vaccinated.
For more information on the vaccine, check out the NHS website at www.nhs.uk. Sanya Skov, City News.
Countries around the world have been marking the anniversary of a year of lockdown. Here in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson addressed the nation exactly 1 year since he first announced the country would go into total lockdown on the 23rd of March. To reflect the year that has been, Neela Nayakoa finds out how the past year shifted the lives of ordinary people.
For most people, it's a year they will never forget. the last year, I think hellish.
Omnisambles.
Apocalyptic.
Wonderful, thank you. And claustrophobic. Don't forget claustrophobic. At least that's how it felt for me. Anyway, these are only but descriptions from the streets of London. The list could be longer. You see, I've just arrived in London from China, where life generally has gone back to pre-pandemic normality, though most of the talk at the dinner table still circles back to the first day of our respective lockdowns. So when the UK yesterday observed its one-year anniversary since Boris Johnson announced the first official lockdown, I was curious. Curious to find out how it's been for a couple of friends I know here. First, Robert Gordon Clerk, who left London with his family for the countryside just when the city was first hunkering down.
And you've been down there for a year. Did you always plan to be there for that long? Or did you just think it might be a few weeks, then you'll be back into the city?
I think most people hoped that they might be back in London, if for those who are like us who came out of London, by the summer. That clearly didn't happen.
Right. And so I proceeded to also ask him how his new country life has changed his overall outlook on life.
Well, I think inevitably for many people, the pace of their lives has changed. I think the biggest thing that I've noticed, and certainly most people I talk to noticed, is the lack of variety in your life. The upside of this, certainly living down here, is appreciating some of the things that you've taken for granted for many years.
And speaking of things that have been taken for granted.
So everybody loves their parks now.
Julian Bell, by the way.
Such a kind of whirlwind turned everybody's life upside down, something we never thought we'd have to live through. And these things, I guess, happen once every 300 or 400 years. And we've lived through it, but we've come through it with fantastic community spirit.
Well, I guess the spirit is the same everywhere. Nila Nikoa for City News, London.
Thank you, Nila. We now pass over Rebecca, who has the latest on the Israeli election. So, Rebecca, this seems to be an important one.
Hi, Olivia. Yes, it is. So yesterday, Israelis took to the ballot box to vote in the fourth general election in the past 2 years. This comes after the National Unity government collapsed in December after just 7 months. The incumbent Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been accused of corruption, claimed an early victory after the exit polls were released. However, as votes are now being counted, it appears that the declaration of victory was premature. Israel's parliamentary system is one of proportional representation, meaning that coalition governments are typical. But at the moment, it seems that Israel is headed for an unprecedented fifth deadlock, as Netanyahu coalition has failed to secure a 61-seat majority in the 120-seat Knesset, the Israeli parliament. Given the PM would only need 2 more seats for a majority, the election remains too close to call. The final outcome of the election might fall back to the United Arab List, the Islamist party. If they are able to pass through the threshold of 3.25% of a national vote, it would gain them 5 seats. Its leader, Mansour Abbas, left the Arab coalition earlier this year and has not ruled out joining Netanyahu's alliance after a surprising election result. And now, joining us live from the Knesset, is James Marlowe, a journalist for the Jewish Weekly. Good afternoon, James. So, could you tell us a bit about what the atmosphere is like in the Israeli parliament? We're going to a break.
This is
City News.
As we all reflect on the year of lockdown, researchers are investigating the ways our impact on the environment might affect our collective future. A scientific report published by Frontiers found that deforestation increases the risks of disease outbreaks like the COVID-19 pandemic. The authors found a link between the variety of tree species and the risk of pandemics. They suggest that when replanting, we should include varied tree species in order to decrease health risks, because diseases would be filtered in healthy and biodiverse forests. Coal India, the world's largest coal miner, has won a contract in the latest round of auctions to set up 500 megawatt solar projects. The contract is a joint venture with state-run NLC India. It plans to invest in 3,000 megawatt solar energy projects. This marks the fossil fuel giant's entry into the renewable sector and signals that the already competitive bidding environment might heat up further. A study done by Tomsk State University in Russia has found microplastics in Siberian snow samples. Microplastics are plastic fragments of less than 5 millimeters in length. They can enter natural ecosystems from many sources, such as cosmetics, clothing, and industrial processes. But what does finding them in snow mean for the environment and for humans around the globe? Sadie Andrew finds out.
The world produces over 381 million tonnes of plastic every year, but we waste well over half of this. Microplastics, which are created when bigger pieces of plastic litter break up over time, are increasingly being found in the air, food, drinking water, and even Arctic ice. Dr. Charlotte Braungard expands.
A large proportion of global plastic manufacture goes into fibrous materials, and if you consider that it's our clothing and also many industrial applications, and one of the most recent functional fibers is PPE against COVID. So
live from London, it's City News International. This is City News International.
Siberia, however, is completely under-researched in this area. Tomsk State University study shows that microplastics are not just circulating in oceans, but are being transported through the atmosphere. Dr. Julia Frank, scientific director at TSU's Microplastics Siberia Center, explains.
It moves from the cities, from the water surfaces with water evaporation, and occur in the atmosphere, and then fall to the surface of the Earth with precipitations, or directly may be transferred by the wind.
I'm in the centre of London to see the reaction of people about the university's preliminary findings and to ask who they think has the greatest responsibility in caring for the environment, the population or the government.
It's definitely people's actions. Government helps, but it's only
media campaigns and awareness.
Government schemes to help more laws on that side of things.
In terms of the environment, I feel like there's only so much that the government can do. I feel people need to make more changes themselves.
The awareness that we must preserve the environment seems to be present in society, but the enforcement is not. Dr. Braungart also argues that education needs to come from a grassroots level and not just from governments.
There is a need for working with each other rather than giving the responsibility to somebody else. We need to work on the same side as government, on the same side of a sustainability goal. And that is at a global level.
The level of toxicity from these microplastics is not yet known, and so we do not know what the consequences of microplastics in the ecosystem will be. Only more research and time will tell us.
And now we head over to Veridiana for the latest in entertainment.
This is City News Entertainment.
Oscar-nominated George Segal, best known for roles in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and Shoot Me, died aged 87 on Tuesday in Santa Rosa, California. He was one of the first actors to find fame in Hollywood without changing his Jewish surname, paving the way for Jewish talents that come after him. His wife, Sonia Segal, confirmed that he passed away due to complications from bypass surgery and said the family was devastated. Segal was also an accomplished banjo player with 3 record albums. Sad news for Marvel's fans as Black Widow has been delayed yet again.
I made mistakes. And a lot of enemies.
The film is now scheduled for release in theaters and on Disney Premier's streaming platforms on the 9th of July. Disney Plus announced Cruella and Shang-Chi will have a double release on the stream service and the theaters as well, on the 28th of May and 3rd of September respectively. For this part, the highest participated Pixar film Luca will only be released on Disney Plus on 18th of June. This new release strategy is concerning for the cinema lovers, as the future of the theaters might be threatened by the streaming service. And finally, singer Demi Lovato has spoke about her struggles with drug abuse in the new YouTube doc-series titled Dance with Devil. The series also details her nearest relapse after an overdose in 2018, as well as her struggle with eating disorders.
I had a photo shoot, and I remember being at the photo shoot and just thinking to myself, like, I don't even know why I'm sober anymore. Like, I am so miserable. I'm not happy. I have all this stuff that I'm dealing with. I picked up a bottle of red wine that night, and it wasn't even 30 minutes before I called someone that I knew had drugs on them. I'm surprised I didn't OD that night.
A new episode is coming out on 6th of April.
A piece of graffiti by the anonymous artist Banksy has raised £16 million for charity. The work initially appeared in an English hospital last year and aimed to raise spirit during the first coronavirus wave. Elena Giuliano reports.
The painting depicts a young boy playing with a superhero nurse doll. Banksy's infamous graffiti has always had a social conscience, but the piece titled Game Changer, which appeared in a hospital in the south of England last year, strikes a particularly heartfelt note in pandemic times. For Catherine Jordan at the Southampton Hospital's charity, the surprise was a much-needed boost.
It was amazing. So obviously it was a very intense time for all staff at the hospital, and receiving the painting and from Banksy is just boosted morale. It was a really, really good feeling.
£2.5 million is your bid.
The piece went under the hammer in London yesterday, with most of the proceeds going to the charity. Sarah MacDonald at Christie's Auctioneer House says it was a record sale for a Banksy piece.
It's over £16 million that's being donated to the charities.
For Eve Callahan, a modern artist, the piece's significance lies in the intent rather than the artistic value.
As an artist, it's very interesting to see how hyper aware he is of the value of his own work and how he kind of uses that to do something that on his behalf is very low effort, but he knows that the art market is such that it will sell immediately.
The undercover artist may be the hero of the day, but this piece is testament to the sacrifices nurses have made in the past year. Elena Giuliano, City News, London.
Republican governor of the American state of South Dakota aims to partially ban trans athletes from competing in women's sport across the state. She was previously criticized for having signed a bill which aimed to completely ban transgender women from competing in women's sports. On Monday, she announced her Defend Title IX Now, effort which limits the ban to elementary and high school sport and excludes collegiate athletics. That means that transgender women will be able to compete in the National Collegiate Athletic Association tournaments, provided they comply with rules on hormone usage.
The European phase of the 2022 FIFA World Cup qualifications will begin tonight, despite the pandemic. The 55 European national football teams are divided into 10 qualifying groups and will play 75 games over 8 days. The qualifying round kicks off tonight, with France facing Ukraine and Belgium playing Wales. The 10 winners will qualify for the final tournament in Qatar, whereas the 10 runner-ups will advance to the playoffs for the remaining 3 spots. In South America, however, football is on hold because of COVID. Games have been cancelled, tournaments postponed, and fans have been unable to attend matches in person. Our reporter, Jack Grogan-Fenn, has more.
Football in South America has been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. This month's World Cup qualifiers are still under threat. The chances of this summer's already delayed Copa America going ahead are far from certain, and recently several regions have had to suspend matches. Argentina has been one of the worst affected countries. 9 months ago, Argentina fans would have been hoping for glory in the continent-wide Copa America, which they were due to co-host with Colombia. But, like many major sporting events in the world, COVID-19 changed that. The tournament will still be going ahead this year, albeit with fewer teams. As South American football writer Joshua Law explains, fans in the country which has given the world the likes of Messi and Maradona have had to be very patient.
The restrictions put in place by the Argentinian government were quite firm. There was no football played in Argentina between March and November. I don't know of any other country where it stopped for so long.
Argentina wasn't the only country whose football system was badly affected, though. As Law notes, the country's major rival to the northeast, Brazil, was also badly hit by COVID-19.
In Brazil, in terms of players getting infected, there have been huge outbreaks, particularly in the Brazilian league. Hundreds of players have been infected with COVID. 2 fairly prominent football coaches have died from COVID.
Lockdowns have meant fans have been unable to attend matches in person, with supporters having to follow their teams over the radio, on TV or online. Louis Smith, a UK-based South American football analyst, says that this hasn't stopped fans from getting as close to their teams as possible.
In terms of Brazil, they've tried to find ways to combat it. So if you see some of the games, like when Internacional were playing their final game of the season, they had fans flooding the streets, lighting flares. That stuff's hard to stop. But I mean, even them not being in the stadium and being outside, it gives at least a feel of atmosphere in the game.
For the time being, stadia remain empty, and Roberto Rojas, a Paraguayan football analyst, believes that fans shouldn't expect too much for the time being.
I think people just have to feel patient and, see what the government feels is right for them to be able to put fans back into the stadiums for any of these games, be it league games, World qualifiers, continental competitions, whatever it may be.
Fans across the football-mad continent may well be dreaming of urging their teams on to victory, but for the time being, they will have to do so from the comfort of their own living rooms. This is Jack Grogan-Fenn reporting for City News.
In Washington, D.C., the rains are heavy and it's cloudy with a temperature of 12 degrees Celsius. The good news is that tomorrow, the weather is forecasted to reach a high of 23 degrees with a lot more sunshine. In Eastern Europe, it looks like a front is moving in, while skies remain clear in the west. So in Bucharest, get your umbrellas out, while in Rome, despite the lockdown, you might want to pull out your sunscreen. In Beijing, China, the weather is clear with periodic clouds. The temperature is 14 degrees Celsius with highs of 21 degrees Celsius and lows of 5 degrees. That's all from me for now. Back to you.
Come rain or shine, we've got you covered.
City News.
That's all from me, Olivia Briand.
And me as well, Akira Kinyo. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
News local to you. This is City.